Leadership Story Talks, where we discuss the practices that engage, motivate, develop, retain, and attract people to businesses. We'll give you principles and tools based on real-world stories to leverage listening and storytelling to become a better leader and management professional. Leadership Story Talks is produced by Narrative, a company that focuses on personal storytelling for business.
Welcome to Leadership Story Talks. In this podcast, Julian Ryan and I, Jerome DeRoy, discuss ways in which we can create more engagement in our lives, especially at work. There are more people today who feel disengaged at work than people who say they feel engaged. So we come from Narrative, which is a company that focuses on engaging businesses and their audiences through the power of listening and storytelling, employing a 7-step method to do so. Now that's a little bit about us, but of course, every time on the show, we have a guest, because we really believe that we don't have all the answers, especially when it comes to engagement, and we're here to learn and give some of that learning to our audiences. So today we have a great guest, really happy to welcome Sasha Robinson on the show. Sasha currently serves as the head of people at Trainual, which is a high-growth SMB training and onboarding SaaS platform. Over 2 years and 2 rounds of VC funding, Sasha has grown the team from 15 to 95 employees. Previously, Sasha served as the internal people ops leader at Coplex, a corporate venture studio, where she also acted as the people and talent partner to the early stage portfolio companies. She offered paid recruiting and HR consulting services to founders and set up early people system infrastructure for growing companies. Prior to Coplex, Sasha spent several years at Campus Logic building and scaling their people and talent function from 15 to 150 employees. Sasha is a mentor for First Round, holds a mini MBA certificate from Dartmouth Tuck Business School and a BS from Barrett Honors College at ASU. And it's worth noting that her honors thesis was on diversity in the workplace. So Sasha, I really want to give you a warm welcome to our show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. And hi, Jules. Always good to be with you.
Excited
So,
to speak.
yeah. So maybe, Sasha, we can start just by, having read your bio and, your experience in growing teams and especially within the people function. I'd love to just hear a little bit more about how you came to do this work and what was the journey?
Yes, absolutely. It certainly wasn't linear or planned. I think like so many HR or people ops professionals, I just stumbled into it by accident. I actually started my undergrad thinking that I was going to go into public policy or get a law degree and go work in education or civil rights public policy. And during my undergrad, I went to Washington, D.C. to do an academic internship program. I worked with this incredible civil rights nonprofit that was actively litigating discrimination cases for housing and employment. And I had this moment where I realized this work is so impactful, but the day-to-day of what I was doing was not very interesting. And I was bored. I was struggling. I was like, I don't know if I could do this for another 40 to 50 years. And so it sparked this need for me to find something that, one, fulfilled this need to impact the broader community, the selfless part of me. And then the selfish part of me is like, what is my day-to-day going to look like? And so kind of had an existential crisis at 19. It's like, I've had this plan. I don't know what I'm doing. And ended up getting a marketing internship at a SaaS company in the Bay Area. They did data recovery. So like the polar opposite, like didn't think that this is what I wanted to do, and ended up becoming friends with the VP of HR there. And they had just lost someone on their team by accident. He was like, could you help with some projects? And I started, and suddenly I felt so fulfilled, realizing that I had the opportunity to create systems and programs to serve the people in the business and create opportunities for folks that were historically disenfranchised or marginalized, which is what initially drew me to the public policy work. And I grew this like affinity very quickly to the operations side and the entrepreneurial side of this people and HR work. And so from there, it just snowballed, and I consumed as much information as I could on this like people ops. And at the time, like a decade ago, I was like, I don't know what this is. And so teaching myself, because that wasn't what I was getting my degree in. And then just trying to learn as much as possible, and kind of just happened.
Wow. Amazing. I love these. It's amazing to me the number of people that we've had on the podcast, and just in life in general, where that journey isn't linear, and you sort of it's very much recently, Jules. We've been talking a lot, it seems, about. And I think it was even coined as the term angels, that kind of look over us, and you meet certain angels in your life, and it seems like complete happenstance, but then you look back and it's like, wow, that made a lot of sense. So.
And Sasha, I want you to be an angel for the next 5 minutes, because you just gave an incredible soundbite to anyone who's going to work with a mission-based or any kind of company or organization where you're in love with the brand or you're in love with the mission. One of the conversations to have with yourself, or when you're recruiting, is what you just said. What are you going to be doing on a day-to-day basis? You could be excited about what the organization is about, but you have to do your day job. So that was always a big question in the recruiting. You're going to be doing data entry, right? So, all the other stuff is exciting, but this is your day job. So I think that's a very teachable moment there that you just shared. Just kind of marry the both, the passion and the purpose and the actual technical skills that you're going to be doing, because you're going to be doing that a number of hours a day. So thank you. I'll hand it back to Jerome, but I just have to get it out there early, because that's huge. That'll be quoted by me to many, trust me, on the next few months.
Well, happy to be helpful.
Okay, at your angel moment there. Thanks.
That's right. That didn't take long. So I'm curious, Sasha. So now with Trainual, can you maybe tell us a little bit more about the company itself? And because I find that concept interesting, the marrying the training and manual, and putting those two words together. But what does that mean in terms of what the company does, and then of course your role within it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I apologize, my bio is a little outdated. I've now been at Trainual 3.5 years. So I've seen them through a lot. I feel like startup years are like dog years. I've been here 3.5. It feels like 3 decades.
Right.
But when I first joined Trainual, it was very early stage. We hadn't even raised our Series A round of funding yet. We had like hundreds, maybe 1,000 customers, but very, very small. And the way that we were marketing our product was training and onboarding, and just documenting the core elements of your business. And then over the last 3.5 years, that shifted, and it's become more sophisticated as we've developed a point of view on a concept we call the business playbook. So everything that you need to run your business documented in one place. So of course, yes, that's new hire employee onboarding, but it's also all of your policies. It's your company history and your mission, vision, values. It's how to document the role. So say you're hiring someone to be a support rep. How do you log into the systems? How do you triage certain tickets? What kind of comms should you use? And once we found the best practice, documenting that and then repeatedly training folks to certain like SOPs or standard operating procedures. And so it's now started to span not only just the content documentation and consumption, but the people and the connections. So we have an org chart functionality now, and then connecting people to their roles and their responsibilities, and creating this really interconnected web of content and information. So like a stranger could log into your Trainual account and know everything they need to know about how to run your business effectively. So that's Trainual in a nutshell. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's kind of interesting to me how I'm imagining that it would dovetail with your own role as the head of people and your experiences beforehand. I mean, since you started like at the inception, it sounds like, or pretty early on, what was your sort of point of view coming from your own experiences, something that the founders and people who started Trainual were also looking at, in addition to, we need someone to help us grow and develop our people? I think I'm curious, because it seems like it would dovetail, right? And I wonder how that manifested, if at all, in terms of you being part of, or your opinions and point of view being part of the perspective that Trainual has on all of these, the creation of these systems.
Yes. So that was like 8 questions in one. And
Yeah, I
remember
tend to do that.
That's true.
Feel free to break it down.
No, totally fine. I do the same thing. And so this is just payback for all of the times I've been on with candidates and asked them 8 questions at once.
Weird.
Yeah, weird questions. So before I started at Trainual, I became connected with the CEO, Chris Ronzio, and we were talking, and there was this immediate connection and synergy around like what I cared about and how I function as a people leader in my prior roles, and what he was trying to build and what he was trying to evangelize. So the product was not only just a software platform to house all of your company information, but how can we build a small business at the time, 15 people? How can we scale a business in a best-in-class way that is people first, and then evangelize those best practices through the product and through content to ensure small businesses all over the world can take the lessons that we've learned in our templates and implement it in their business. And so part of the selling point to me was I not only get to like work for an incredible company with incredible people, but I get to like test and figure out what works and then share it with thousands and tens of thousands of customers and future customers. So that was something interesting early on. But weirdly enough, prior to joining Trainual, I feel like I wasn't a great documenter. And so I saw the value in what Trainual was doing. Like, yeah, of course, onboarding is one of the most pivotal moments in the employee experience, but I didn't realize, like, honestly, like how crappy some of the experiences I had provided historically probably were. I was tapping our leadership teams and managers for hours and hours of live training every single onboarding. And sometimes that was every other week. And suddenly realizing like you could document this in a video or in like a written procedure, and suddenly you're freeing up so much time. And then the time that your leaders and your new hires are connecting is really meaningful. It's driving relationships and like double tapping on important topics rather than like, here's how you do X, Y, Z, and here, and some of the monotony that can follow with that. I've completely lost all of the other elements of your question. So what am I missing? What else should I talk through?
No, this is great. This is great. Essentially, you've hit on it, because what I was trying to express was that, I was wondering if what you do for your clients was essentially a mirror for what you do internally as the head of people, and so I got that answer and more, because the thing that I wanted to kind of follow up on was this, and this is more of a learning, but just for our listeners, I think, similar to what you said earlier, Jules, and what you caught or flagged, I should say. Here, what I want to flag is the documentation part, because you're not alone. I feel like we've heard this so many times. If only something had been written down that someone could then go to. It's that sort of transfer of knowledge, the principle of knowledge transfer that doesn't really happen or falls down because the systems aren't in place to capture that knowledge. So I think that's a really good learning, and I appreciate the candor in which you said that, even yourself. And so here you kind of saw something that you could have used, it sounds like, in your own previous experiences. And I just love it when that happens, because that's when you kind of know you're on the right path. It's like, oh yeah, here's something I'm responding to because I could have used it. So of course I'll be able to evangelize that thing that we're selling in a much more effective way.
And your keyword, when you meet these people who come trotting into whatever, like the virtual or in-person conference room, it's the ability to have some contact and have a relationship, or understand what kind of has them hardwired, more than listing a lot of facts that nobody's going to remember by the time they walk out the door anyway, and they're going to still ask you the same questions the next day or the next week, because I was one of those people. I knew it was important. I have no recollection what you told me. So yeah, it's humanizing the process and using tech and human in the best capability. So I love that.
So I'm curious, and maybe this will repeat a little bit what you've already said, but I'm wondering if over the years, and before you were with Trainual, and now since you've been there, were there any sort of frustrations or challenges you saw that were part and parcel of being the head of people, or being in that kind of position, that you were able to sort of say months or years later, oh, here's a way to address that frustration or that challenge, or I'm now in a position that I can actually do something about something that I noticed, 5-6 years ago, but now I can do something about it. I'm curious about those kinds of examples or aha moments, if you will, and if there's something in particular that comes to mind.
Yeah, I have a couple, and they're all very different and almost like aimed at different people. So
Mm,
I have one learning as also like the admin, someone who is managing processes and systems, not only like software systems, but like company-wide systems, um, especially in the people space. I feel like it is so easy in this role or in the people function to absorb so much of the emotion and the heaviness. And I think a lot of people that are incredibly empathetic and people focused are drawn to this function. And
mm,
so when things get hard, as like the last 3, 4, 5 years have shown us between the pandemic and all of the other stuff that's happened, it's super easy to absorb everything. And
mm,
so I know for myself and for a number of my peers and mentors, burnout, because they were taking on the emotions and just everything that was happening in the world and in their company was very real. And I had this incredible mentor about a year ago help me work through the ability to depersonalize decisions and things that are happening,
mm,
because I would just feel like sick to my stomach as like if we had to do a term and knowing everything I knew about this person's family. And it was unsustainable for me, but I knew how important this work was and how positively it impacted the people on our team. And so just a reminder for folks to like bring your full self to work, but also understand where to put up boundaries and how to depersonalize and understand when it's your job to set up systems for people to be successful, but ultimately you're not responsible for someone individually being successful in their role. Um,
mm,
and I think that was hard for me to learn because I wanted to brute force my way into making everyone successful and everyone happy, especially during the pandemic, like getting feedback in our engagement survey that people were burned out and sad and like hated being at home. I just wanted to like go and hug everyone. And like that emotional burden was so heavy. So that would be my first one, like understanding
mm,
how to set boundaries and depersonalize a little bit within reason. Um, I think another area, like as I started my career, I think, and then transitioned to where I am now, this information dissemination has been really interesting to see. Like when I was younger, I always felt like, oh, there's probably more information I don't have. And I wish I had it. And I feel like there's like a lack of transparency or honesty and um like subtle plug for Trainual. But I love that like having a tool for full documentation has allowed me now to be really transparent about things that I was never transparent about
mm,
before or in the loop on, like compensation strategy. Like when do we do comp evaluations? How do we do them? Where do we get our data? Or how do we manage performance? Why do we do it this way? And aligning those two things and being really clear with our employees and setting very crisp expectations. And so I think I've realized the importance of not only transparency, but like going back to the documentation and information
mm,
dissemination and knowing how easy it is for folks to project their own narrative or past baggage onto a situation and without the extreme clarity. And I think in writing is so helpful. So those would be I think the two that
mm.
come to mind. And I'm a rambler, so I want to apologize in advance for that. It looks like I'm in good company.
But here's what I think is very important from your first example when you talked about employee transitions and managing employee relations and then all the emotions that it seems like you really learned some tough lessons that being an empathic person was important, but knowing that part of your role was to be the intermediary of different voices and perspectives on what was happening in those working relationships. And it didn't make you less of a good person, but you had to establish some boundaries because um, I think one of the important things to learn the hard way, because employee relations was nothing I wanted to ever do for, and I ended up being thrown in for a while, but it was the respecting of the process. and each person got their due. And I used to be amazed sometimes when people would link in afterwards, you're like, I changed your life, but it was about the respect of the process. So not to shut it down and be robotic. That's not what you're advocating. You're saying, figure out where you can bring the most value to that person so they can be successful perhaps in the next role. Maybe there's coaching, maybe there's things you can help them as they're out and offboarding the organization, and then coaching within to find out, like, let's not repeat this again. What didn't work. So I really respect, and I think that's a subtle thing that doesn't get talked about much.
Yeah. It kind of, what it made me think of was just the importance of codifying things and, having them in writing, and how I think a lot of people, what I've noticed is that, a lot of people may not do those things because there's always something more important to do. It seems like, we've got to respond to this thing that's happening right now. And these things take time. It takes time to create a system. But it's precisely when there's change, when there's crises, when there's challenges that come up, that those systems are really helpful. Or on the opposite end, when things are growing and it's going really well, same thing. Systems are what help you scale, and it sounds like you've got a lot of experience with that, Sasha. And so it's great to hear that, I think especially when we bring it to like expectations, and sort of knowing where it helps to know where you stand. And you're also, you can cut through a lot of noise if you're like, well, that's actually what we said on this paper, as opposed to these other things. And you can still be empathic about it, but and understanding. But it's also important to kind of look at what did people actually say, and what was said in writing as an expectation, and those expectations can change naturally. But yeah, that's to me the lesson here is having things in writing, especially those that you may not think are the most important at the moment, but that's going to come back and help you when the time comes. I'm curious, this we talk a lot about engagement on this show, and of course that's we use storytelling and narrative to help engage people. And I'm curious, from your experiences, especially you've alluded to the last few years that have been really filled with changes and challenges, whether it's societal or within companies in general. What have you kind of seen from your point of view in terms of the changes in how you engage employees nowadays compared to, let's say, 3-4 years ago? Have you seen first of all, have you seen a lot of change, and how have you kind of responded to that? How do you do engagement these days?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I think if I think back pre-pandemic, when all of my prior roles were 100% or close to 100% in office, there was this element of like, I personally, like me, Sasha, I'm going to make your life at this company amazing. And I will talk to you every day. I will ensure that we're doing the things that bring you joy. I'm building connections. So even if you don't know anyone else, or you don't connect with people on your team, like, you've got me, which is a completely unsustainable way to think about engagement. But for smaller teams, it was feasible for me for a while because I loved the work. I loved working, and it was okay if I worked a lot. And when we transitioned remote, like, my world was shook because I didn't know how to be able to help people as effectively when I couldn't be there, or my team couldn't be there in person building relationships. And I think for a lot of people like me, extroverts who love being in person, like, it was a very strange transition. But I think it forced me to think about, like, what does each individual person or team need? And we started focusing on team specific engagement strategies or connection tactics. So we got a lot wrong. Like, we tried to do a ton of Zooms and engagement chats. And early on in the pandemic, everyone was burning out and like, please, no more Zooms. I want nothing on Zoom ever again. But thinking about things like, for engagement, some people feel engaged by their leader having a genuine one-on-one conversation with them and talking about their kids and making sure they feel seen as a person. For another one, it's acknowledging that they have some health care issues or disability and like asking if there's anything they can do to make their lives better. For others, it's, I just want to hop on a Zoom and play Jackbox with my coworkers and have some laughs at the end of the week. And so, like, we surveyed our team a lot, talked to them live, and just figured out like, what do you need right now? And we tried to be considerate about like, you give us whatever you can right now. There's a lot going on in the world. And then I think that as it has continued to inform our engagement strategy, like heavily customized and personalized, nothing is mandatory. Like you bring whatever you want to of yourself, ideally all of it, but whatever you're comfortable with, attend as much as you want. Kind of encouraging this like optionality and customized engagement approach was important for us and over the last couple of years.
I noticed, in looking at your bio and knowing a little bit about you, that diversity in the workplace was a really important topic, and I remember when things kind of came to a head in 2020 in particular, how did that inform, like how, I mean, obviously you studied this, and that was part of it seems to be part of the fabric of how you think about things. But I'm curious, when it comes to diversity in the workplace, what does that mean to you, and how does that inform your own engagement strategies?
Yeah. My mind initially goes to the importance of storytelling, which is so serendipitous. And I love that we're here. But back in 2020, when things did come to a head, the way that we initially broached having really tough conversations at work was around telling stories around our different experiences, telling a story of what's happening in the world around us. How does that make us feel? Does that like change how we feel when we're at work? Do we feel safe at work? And it was like we had a couple of very heavy lunch and learns or kind of all team meetings. And I think just being able to be vulnerable and authentic and like talk about our own experiences was so important for the Trainual DEI strategy. Last year, we hosted a week where we celebrated the different voices and stories of members of our team who are not in the majority. So some of our non-white or members of our LGBTQ plus community. And we shared food, cultures, traditions, language through all different sync and async mediums. And again, like it wasn't a hugely profound activity, but the fact that someone could say, hey, I can share what country I'm from, the celebrations that are important to me. And like, I've never been able to do that at work before. Like, I feel like everybody can know everything about me. And like, that's cool. And so the importance of employees being able to share their own stories, I think has been pivotal for inclusion. And then more broadly within diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, I think that I have focused most on the equity, and ensuring from early days when we were only 15 people that we established our compensation strategy, our promotion philosophy, how we thought about performance management and bias in performance management. Because if you don't have a philosophy, it's very easy for things to become custom or unique treatment of different people based on circumstances. And it doesn't seem malicious in the moment. And it doesn't seem like there'll be like long tail impact, but there can, and there often is. And so I think I'm most proud of that, and ensuring now, like as compensation transparency has become a very hot topic, like we had all of that established, and I feel really good about where our job ladders and our compensation levels are, and I'm paying people fairly. And so like, I think the biggest way to impact folks that have potentially been locked out of opportunities is giving them access to opportunities and ensuring equal access to compensation and promotions, because like, that's what changes lives. And so I think that, without talking too much longer, I think that's probably the most important thing as part of our DEI strategy, plus the storytelling as part of inclusion.
Well, if you want to build trust and inclusion, you have to give information and explain the logic and what it looks like and why, and have conversations, not just hand them a piece of paper and tell them this is our program. What I think is interesting, because you used a word in the beginning, nonlinear, but one thing that came up in your bio when we were all looking to make sure we did our homework, was the diversity, equity, inclusion was showing up in your life early on in high school, and perhaps even before. So I just thought that was very interesting, that seemed to be a constant, no matter what your interest area was, that you were really championing things in your life and in your community.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to have some very impressive, very cool friends who kind of took me along for the ride and educated me when I was like 15-ish. It was a really important time in almost everyone's life. And
Mm.
I think I lived a very sheltered life prior to that, but was given access to folks who had other experiences than myself. And I think that sparked this fire, like appreciation for everything that I had growing up and then wanting to give back. And so that was part of some of the work in high school, and then why I wanted to go into civil rights and education policy. And then when the day-to-day didn't make sense, pivoting that care, and especially focusing on marginalized communities, being able to support them in different ways. Like, how can I best provide opportunities or like impact everyone's lives positively? And this seemed like a really logical marriage of the awesome day to day and having a great impact.
Yeah, that's great. And I wonder if this isn't a good sort of transition to this question that we ask of all of our guests, given that you were just telling us about, a formative experience, it sounds like, in high school. Could you tell us about an experience that still maybe that you see has shaped who you are today, or maybe still influences you today? And if it dovetails with things that you've already said, that's okay. Our listeners are very tolerant of repetition, so and I'm sure it'll be a little bit different.
The repetition, the rambling, all of the things from me. Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Northern California, just south of San Francisco, in a very candidly affluent area. And I'm a white girl. I had a very privileged life, and I read academic literature, and in my head I was like, I get it. I understand there are some problems, but this is so embarrassing to say. But when I was 14, I was like, I think we're post-racial. I think we figured it out. And so embarrassing. But I had a friend who was so patient and so kind. He was like, Sasha, I don't know if that's really true. And have you had exposure to other people's experiences, or heard other stories, or understood what things are like outside of your little bubble? And so it was this multi-year journey of becoming friends with him and other people in his circles, and joining the nonprofit that he started, and really being able to understand my lived experience is different and very unique and very privileged. And one specific instance, we were actually out, and we're driving, and we're pulled over. He was a Black man and was pulled over by a cop. And I was like, oh yeah, no worries, totally fine. And the cops began to interrogate him. We were doing nothing wrong. We're going to arrest you. And I was like, what is happening? We were speeding, nothing, everything is fine. And it was oh, all those movies that I thought were exaggerations, are lived experiences. And it's this was an empathy building moment for me. And I realized not many people get that if you live in somewhat segregated communities. And so kind of opened my eyes to issues. And I know that's only one fraction of what some people experience on a daily basis, but I think that's what initially sparked the need to want to do more. And again, to the burnout piece, it can be really exhausting trying to help other people or fix systemic issues. And so being able to say here's what I'm doing, here's how I'm making an impact, here's my sphere of influence, and trying every day to do right by the people in your life and in your community has been really important since high school.
Thank you for that honesty too. That's important to hear. But you're right. We don't learn. We can learn off a PDF and a PowerPoint, but it's sitting with somebody and being exposed to their story or witnessing their story happening. And that's the biggest teacher of all. Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for that, because I think what it illustrates, in addition to that point, also, you have to also be willing to be kind of taken out of your comfort zone, because I feel like there's a lot of people who could have come to that conclusion like you did and say, I don't have to listen to anything else that's outside of my worldview, right? I mean, that does happen as well. And it takes something to actually be curious, to hear somebody else's point of view, and then to actually, see that lived experience in action and experience it yourself. And that's usually where the change kind of occurs, right? But it's such a great, with everything you've told us, about you and what you do, it's great that you told us about that experience, because it also kind of gives us a little bit more of an understanding of where it is that you're coming from, and that there's something about you that you've communicated that now tells me Sasha's a pretty open-minded person, right? Like I could probably bring something to you that even if it's not in your lived experience, you would be able to take it in and understand it and try to respond to it in the right way, or in an appropriate way. So there's a lot. It's always fascinating to me when we ask these questions, right, Jules? Because or that particular question, because we usually people do tell us about their childhood or something that happened when they were pretty young, and it's amazing to me how you can see kind of just in that snippet, because it's only one snippet, and I definitely don't want to reduce people to that one moment, but it's amazing to me how much it does kind of give in terms of information about someone and their worldview. You know, it's not far off the mark, you know, who you are today from, you know, that what you learned at that young age. Yeah. So I want to, there's one last thing that's kind of on my mind, which is circling back, because we've talked about diversity, we've talked about engagement, you know, we've talked about even the challenges of the last few years, and, you know, the remote, you know, suddenly having to be remote, and how do we engage people around that? And you've given us a few examples of, you know, the kinds of things that you do, which is essentially you kind of, what I would interpret it as is you meet people where they are. And you said in passing that, you know, you do a lot of surveys and you're asking people, is that the primary mode of measuring engagement and kind of changing, if you have to, what you're doing?
Yes and no. So we do 2 engagement surveys per year, 6 months apart, and we're gauging sentiment across satisfaction with our benefits, through team communication, through like their satisfaction with their level of performance feedback, and like everything in between. And so we use those as benchmarks with enough time in between where we feel like we can make like a reasonable amount of change and actually measure impact. And so following each of those engagement surveys, we do a deep dive into all of the comments and the trends, and we developed a couple of themes or action items out of those. And then we share those with the entire company and say, hey, you said that work-life balance is suboptimal. We hear you. Here are the 3 things we're going to try. It was particularly bad in engineering, and so we're shifting our release schedule from Friday to Tuesday. Here's why. We're doing X and Y. Here's why. And then testing it again in 6 months. We've also started to hone in a little bit deeper on the department-specific engagement, because as our teams have grown to 10 or 15, 20 people, there can be subcultures and experiences that differ wildly from team to team. And so focusing on trends within each team. And then we have an ongoing pulse survey that we have through our engagement survey software tool. And so we're getting real-time feedback on our ENPS and a couple of smaller metrics and little comments. So we'll know if things start trending like dramatically differently in one area or another in real time. And then we'll do smaller surveys, or like we asked all of our affinity group leaders, like, hey, would you be willing to hop on a 20-minute call with us to talk about your experience being like a member of the non-majority at Trainual and what we can do to better support you, and do live conversations. And so sometimes I feel like we lean a little bit more on the qualitative because we are so small and we are so relationship focused, and not trying to solve for one, but getting information and real feedback and live experiences, and then trying to build that into what we do. And then the engagement surveys are kind of the bookend measurement to ensure that we're making progress over time.
But you read my mind, because while you were talking about the surveys, I was like, I wonder if you do much live or teach people to do the live, because there's nuances in that. Some people don't want to commit comments. They don't trust where the URL is going to take them or how it's going to be interpreted. So that side-by-side conversation around a table to dig a little deeper can really reveal a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like it's so easy to misconstrue something that's in writing, especially without a lot of context provided. And so being able to either ask them for additional context, or if you feel comfortable coming forward, let's have a live conversation, but the nuances where all the good stuff is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is such a great message, actually, for everyone. Nuance is where the great stuff is, and I really appreciate everything you've said, Sasha, because it's been a really great mix of kind of overview, but also these really specific tactics that I really hope our listeners can sort of take to heart, because I've often heard, well, what do we do? How often do we do surveys, and what do we do with them, and how do we communicate about them? But then there's these other subtle things that you've talked about, I think, are really helpful. And so hopefully our listeners can take that and start to implement some of those things. So I really want to thank you for your time and for being with us today. And Jules, did you have anything else you wanted to ask or say before we close?
I just comment because I think you gave such a good overview of how technology and the data and your tools were there to help you humanize, not to hide. And I think, and to put your energies in the important parts of the relationships that you cannot substitute, or at least I think you can't substitute. So I think that's a good call to action to folks to own up to, do the tough stuff, because you have the tools that'll help you support those conversations. So really, really interesting. I'm so glad I got to meet you. Jerome's met you more than once at this point, but I got to meet you today here in this platform.
Yeah.
It was such a pleasure getting to spend time with you both.
Yeah, great. Now, is there anything, Sasha, that you would want to communicate to our listeners before I do my ending? My parting reflections, anything such as a website, resources, anything you want to leave behind?
Sure. If you're interested in training and onboarding or documenting your business, I obviously have to plug Trainual. It's trainual.com, Trainul. It's a little hard for a second to remember how to spell it. You're also welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. My name is Sasha Robinson. But I think my last parting nugget would just be that even if this work gets really hard, which for the listeners that are either actively in the people ops, HR, engagement space, it can be really hard. Sometimes it can be lonely, or you feel like no matter how much you pour into making lives better, it doesn't matter, and it does. And if you need someone to talk to, or you need ideas, I'm here. I have tons of resources documented already that I'd be happy to open source if you're walking into a role and it's feeling a little daunting.
Well, thank you so much on behalf of all our listeners, and thanks
for community building too. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks, Jules, as always, for being a wonderful co-host. And I want to also thank our listeners, as always, and tell you all to not forget to subscribe and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform, as this is what drives the word of mouth. And as always, if you want to visit our website, narrative.com, NARATIV.com, for information on how you can find, craft, and present the stories that will engage your audiences like nothing else has before. That's the place to go, and we're always ready to listen to you. And I want to thank you again, Sasha, and please don't hesitate, everybody, to go to Trainual.com. Really great company, great concept, and of course reach out to Sasha as she's given this great invitation. So thank you very much, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narrative.com.